Hi, it's 2 minutes past, so we're going to get going. So hello and welcome to today's PortSwigginar on the topic of Burp Suite Enterprise Edition. We've got a mix of users on the call today, including existing customers, those that may have not seen the tool for a couple of years, and also some current trialists that are going through their evaluation. Before we get going, some introductions and a little bit of housekeeping. So my name's Adam. I work with our trialists and customers supporting their evaluations and procurement of Burp Suite Enterprise Edition. I have Alex to my right.
Yeah, hi folks. Alex, I'm a member of the technical support team. So as well as the day-to-day support we provide for our products, we also help customers on board in terms of POCs, trials and technical questions.
We've also got Hannah, James, Sophie and Maya in the background who are going to be managing the Q&A facility in the Zoom toolbar. Please use it to ask any questions that you have during the session. Please use that box rather than using the chat if possible, please. We'll try and respond to them all as quickly as we can, and we'll pick out some of the questions to answer live towards the end of the session. We will, however, follow up via email with all of the questions asked today and all of the answers, and we'll group them into topics. This session is also being recorded and will be available on the PortSwigger YouTube channel. So if you wish to watch anything back of today's session or share it with a member of your team, then that'll give you the ability to do that. As well as that, we're running our next session on the 22nd of June, same time. So if you've got any colleagues that would benefit from attending live, then please let us know and we can extend an invite to them. Yep. Perfect. So just a quick recap on today's agenda. So we're going to be covering the different versions of Burp Suite, what's new with Burp Suite Enterprise Edition, potentially since you've last looked at the tool. A little bit of background on our licensing model in terms of unlimited applications and unlimited users. Alex is going to run through a product overview, which includes deployment methods, how to get scanning quickly, and an overview of our integration with CICD pipelines. We then promised you some roadmap information, so we're going to split that in two, sort of the existing publicly available roadmap and also a little bit of a sneak peek in terms of some features that are due in the next couple of months. We'll then round off with the Q&A session before we finished. Hopefully we'll be running to about 25-30 minutes for the session today. Okay, so we're briefly going to cover off the two paid versions of Burp Suite. So many of you will be familiar with and are likely already using Burp Suite Professional. This is our manual pen test toolkit with features such as proxy, intruder, repeater. Pro also uses the Burp Scanner, which is the main commonality with Burp Suite Enterprise Edition. Burp Suite Enterprise Edition uses that scanner to carry out automated web vulnerability scanning. These scans can be triggered via the inbuilt scheduler or maybe launched via an integration with a CICD pipeline, something that Alex is going to demonstrate later in the session. The main reason that we wanted to highlight this to you is that it's often thought that Pro and Enterprise are a tiered product set, so Enterprise sitting above Pro, and in fact they're designed to be used to complement each other. So Enterprise to provide the automated scanning, faster feedback earlier on in the software development lifecycle, and Professional for the more targeted manual testing. In fact, the majority of Enterprise Edition customers are also users of Burp Suite Professional. If any further clarification is needed, then please let the team know. So as I mentioned earlier, for those of you on the call who may not have seen the product for a number of years, it's worth a quick recap on what's new in terms of the headline features. I'm not going to cover all items. I don't want to sort of keep you here all day, but this is by no means an exhaustive list, but just to pick out a few. So compliance reporting. So we've got enhanced reporting of scan results against specific compliance frameworks, including PCI DSS and OWASP Top 10. Kubernetes. So you can now deploy Burp Suite Enterprise Edition to an existing Kubernetes cluster much more easily using a Helm chart. Again, Alex is going to cover this during the product overview later. Burp extensions. The Pro users on the call should be familiar with our Burp application store. So in August 2021, one of the releases that we had added support for Burp extensions in Enterprise Edition. It's worth noting that for pro users that are very familiar with the BAP store, there's not necessarily parity between the available apps in Pro versus Enterprise. And this is because Enterprise extensions must be written in Java and must not and cannot make any changes to the UI as they would in Pro. And also, as we mentioned earlier, Enterprise doesn't have any of those manual features of Pro, which a lot of the BAP extensions rely on. We've added support for bulk actions within the UI. So this allows you to add sites, move and delete sites and folders, launch quick scans, and cancel or delete scans all in bulk, whereas previously this was done as a single action. And finally, especially if you trialed the product back in sort of conception 2018-19, we've made some huge improvements to Burp Scanner in terms of its ability to scan single page applications that are obviously now synonymous with modern web architecture. Next up, something that I don't want to put too much focus on, but we get quite a lot of questions asked, is around our licensing model and what we'd refer to as concurrent scanning. So we often get asked, how is Burp Suite Enterprise Edition licensed? So in brief, it's licensed on what we would call concurrent scans. So we do not limit the number of applications, domains, URLs, or even users. They are all unlimited. The only thing that we limit with our licensing is the number of concurrent scans. So unlike most other automated web vulnerability scanners, so our competition, Burp Suite Enterprise Edition scans can be assigned and reassigned across your any websites, applications, URLs that are within your portfolio. So basically, you do not need the same number of subscriptions, concurrent scans, to match the size of your application portfolio. So hopefully this example will sort of bring it to life a little bit more. So when we ask how many concurrent scans do I need, basically it all depends on the size of your organization and how secure you aim to be. So companies with a large web portfolio that they need to scan frequently will need more scanning resources than small companies just starting out with automated scanning. So if we think of an organization that may have 500 applications, but they're not scanning them all day, every day, more realistically, they maybe want to hit 50 apps per day with a combination of scheduled scans and scans triggered by a CICD pipeline. So we assume that the scans fit within that working day or within a specific scan window. You would only need a license for 50 concurrent scans in that situation. You wouldn't need the 500. Alex will touch on this later when we look at some of the examples, but that obviously massively reduces the cost of licensing. And when we speak to a lot of customers, one of their major issues is as their application portfolio grows, so does the cost of scanning. In our scenario, that's not necessarily true. Finally, if you kick off more scans than you have license for, effectively, that will just wait until some of the resource is free, and then that scan will kick off. And what does that look in terms of pricing? We're very open and honest about our pricing at PortSwigger. Pricing is available directly on the website. There's no smoke and mirrors to it. So the base Burp Suite Enterprise Edition license with one concurrent scan is $4,999, $5,000. And each additional concurrent scan thereafter is $499. Now that's for a 12-month subscription. So in the example that we just discussed, a license with 50 concurrent scans would be $29,500. You can also procure 1, 2, 3, right up to 10-year subscriptions if that is easier for your procurement process. Payment or all of that pricing is available direct through our website, and you can purchase direct from the site, or you can purchase via a reseller of your choice. That's completely up to you. So the bit that hopefully you've all been looking forward to, I'm going to hand over to Alex, who's going to run over a product overview, and we're going to start with architecture and deployment.
Thanks, Adam. So folks, we're going to do a quick run through of the architecture and the existing and new deployment methods, give you a flavor of what that looks like, and then we'll jump into the demo. If you've got any questions through this, feel free to drop those into the chat. We've got our colleagues ready to answer those for you. So Enterprise is made up of a number of core components. Those are as follows. So we've got the web server in terms of user access. We've got the enterprise server, which is effectively handling the business logic behind enterprise itself. And then we're going to have one or more scanning machines. And all of these components will then connect to some form of SQL database, be that the embedded H2 that we can provide as part of a deployment or something that you've chosen for yourself. And what actually is a scanning machine? So the scanning machine is the entity that's going to be performing the actual scan. Think of it as your automated penetration tester. And this will be deployed to either a virtual or physical machine. Now, when you set up for the first time, particularly in the notion of a trial or a POC, that's probably going to be all bundled together on the one machine, nice and easy to test. But as you grow or scale, typically you would then deploy those scanning machines externally, and you can deploy as many as you wish. So in terms of the deployment options for Burp Suite Enterprise, there are two choices. So option one is going to be our standard installer, and this is effectively you downloading the installer from our release page and installing it to an OS of your choice. That could be Windows, various flavors of Linux, Mac OS. Essentially, as long as it's 64-bit and can run Java 11, you should be absolutely fine. And then you've got a further choice of either a single machine deployment or multi-system, which we'll talk about in a sec. And then purely based on preference, you've got a second option, which is our new Kubernetes deployment. So this is deployed via the provided Helm chart, and the idea is that it's going to work with any cluster you might have, irrespective of its underlying setup, as long as you meet our prereqs, which again we'll cover in a sec. Again, these two options are really down to preference, how you typically manage your environments. You could argue that the Kubernetes has one sort of advantage, let's call it, which is in the auto-scaling scanning machines. So whereas with the standard installer, you're pre-provisioning your scanning machines, so the resource is there ready to go, although you may not be scanning all the time. One advantage of the Kubernetes is that we don't pre-provision those scanning machines. They are created when you create a scan job. They run, and when the scan finishes, the scanning machine is killed off. And naturally, in a cloud-based environment, that's got inherent advantages in terms of a cost benefit. So with the standard installer, we mentioned the single machine deployment, and it's exactly as the name suggests. Everything goes onto one machine. So enterprise server, the database, which is a H2 database that we provide, the web server, and a single scanning machine, which will be capable of running X number of scans based on the system resources available. Again, nice and straightforward. So this is good for trial or POC purposes. Take you about 5 or 10 minutes to get set up and scanning. Now, where the notion of scale comes in with enterprise, this will very much be the multi-system deployment and is what is typical for a production deployment. So the enterprise server and web server will live together. You can still use our bundle database, which might sit on the same machine. Typically, customers tend to use their own external database, and we've got a supported list available in our system requirements, which we can provide. And then the scanning machines will also be deployed externally to their own machine, and you can see the various connectivity that's going on there for all the components to talk to each other. But again, this is where the notion of scale comes from, and we can deploy as many of those scanning machines as we like. In terms of that outbound connectivity, so we're going to need a connection to PortSwigger.net over port 443, which can be proxied if required. This is for your activation and also how we deliver automated updates. We've also got Burp Collaborator. If you're a pro user, you're probably familiar with Collaborator already, but that connection is going to enable some additional out-of-bound type payload scanner checks. You can deploy a private one if required. And then naturally, your scanning machines will need access to your target applications, which are typically going to be over your default ports of 18.443. So that's a standard installer. For the Kubernetes, again, we've got a lot more documentation on this, which we can make available if it's of interest to you. But the premise is fairly straightforward in that essentially you have control over the cluster in the sense that if you deploy it, it might be an existing cluster. And as long as you meet these 3 prerequirements, you should be absolutely fine. So we're going to need some sort of ingress solution. This is typically going to be a load balancer or ingress controller. We're going to need a persistent volume claim. So that'll be your application name -PVC, and that needs to be shared by all the nodes in the namespace. And then to take advantage of that auto scaling that we talked about earlier, the cluster node auto scaling will need to be enabled. But other than that, enterprise should run on any cluster, irrespective of its setup. So, you could be interested in different cloud providers, AWS, Azure, GCP, even a private cluster, etc. So we've talked there around the licensing and also the deployment and architecture options. So if we just kind of package that up into an example for you. So let's say you've purchased Burp Suite Enterprise and you've chosen 15 concurrent scans. Maybe you've run a trial and you've determined that's suitable for your current application environment. And you've chosen to deploy to AWS EC2 using the standard installer, and you want to go for a multi-machine setup. So we're going to deploy the enterprise and web server to one EC2 image and another one for the Postgres database. In this example, that's what the database we've chosen is. And then we want to split our scanning machines into 3 and assign 5 of our 15 concurrent scan limit to each of the 3. So that gives us our total 15 concurrency. We've split them across 3 machines because that's useful from a resource perspective. We know we're not going to be constrained on any one particular machine. That's a total of 5 images so far. Now, as our applications scale, we might be developing more, we might have onboarded more applications. That concurrency can scale with you as well. So at any point during that, you can add another scanning machine and increase that concurrency license limit. So in this example, we've added another 5. So our purchase price over that 1-year subscription is going to be $11,985. Some point down the line in that year's subscription, we've added another 5 concurrent scans. That's $2,495, but that will be prorated with your 12-month subscription, essentially. And now it's time for the demo. So we'll log in here, as we mentioned. It's web server base, so we shall log in here. And for those users that have trialed, an older version, you probably can already see some quite drastic changes. So the idea is to create a modern interface that's very simple, easy to understand and digest data, but while still giving you relevant information that you can use and action against. So as a new installation, our first task is probably to set up our team. So as you mentioned, we don't put limits on users. So you could have multiple users, you can have teams across geographical locations, access Burp Suite, that's not a problem. So it's all role-based access control. We create roles and assign them permissions. You can see some built-in ones here. So maybe you've got someone who's a scan initiator, maybe someone just looking at results. And then you can also extrapolate that into groups for larger teams if that's your preference. Now, these are all local users and managed locally. If you've got something like Active Directory already in existence to manage your users or an IDP, so if we go to settings and integrations, we do support SAML and LDAP integration, so you can pass those existing users and groups across via that integration. And then assuming that those groups exist in Burp Suite, they're going to inherit the permissions that you've assigned, nice and straightforward. If you want your AD or IDP to just manage authentication and manage those groups more directly yourselves, we've also released SCIM integration. So if your IDP supports SCIM, you can take advantage of that. So now that our team's set up, we'll probably want to take a look at our scanning machines. So we can see here we've actually got a single machine deployment. Everything's bundled together. We can see we've got one local scanning machine, local IP, so it's all sitting on the same machine. And also down here is our license limit. So this is actually a trial license for which you get 35 max concurrent scans. And you can assign these to your scanning machines using the toggle button on the fly. So I could now deploy more scanning machines and then assign my license limit as I kind of see fit. Generally speaking, the guidance in terms of system resource is 5 concurrent scans per scanning machine. And you can see here as scans are allocated, that limit, that 5 limit that I've assigned will populate. And then scans, once that's full, will queue. But as Adam mentioned, once that becomes available again, the scan will essentially kick off. We can also organize our scanning machines into scanning pools, which is a way of grouping scanning machines or resources together. And we can also tie them explicitly to sites. So if we need dedicated resource for sets of applications, we can do so. So we set up our team. We know our scanning machines are good to go. So now we can start to create our sites. And the premise is very straightforward. Our sites are our target applications that we want to scan, and then we run a scan schedule or ad hoc scans against those sites. So typically a lot of your activity or configuration is done at the site level, and then we just run our scans on top. So we can see here we've got a lot of sites already pre-populated. They're organized into folders. As Adam mentioned, we've got some bulk action items that we can complete now. So if I select the folder, it's then going to select all the sites within that folder. I can do multiple folders, and I can do a quick scan. I can move those sites, or I can delete them. And this is just the start of our bulk action work. So we've got some upcoming developments that are going to revolve around folder level actions. So anything that you can typically do at a site level, for example, assign or amend a scan config, is also going to be achievable with the bulk actions as well. So as a new deployment, we might want to import our sites en masse. We might have a lot of applications where we can complete the CSV template to do so. But I'll just give you a quick flavor of what it's like to create a site from scratch. So we'll call this test. Again, we can organize this into our created folders. And then we want to complete our site scope, which is effectively what we're scanning against. So one important component is that site URL. So this is the highest level URL that we want to include as part of that scan. And then all our subdirectories will be included by default. And we can see here that we're going to scan using HTTP and S, or we can specify one of those protocols if required. Now, if I expand the additional menu here, we can also have some inclusive and exclusive rules around those URLs. So maybe we want to exclude part of our site. We don't need to scan it. We don't want to. Or maybe we want to explicitly define some API endpoints, for example. And then we can start to apply advanced settings to our site. So this is mainly going to revolve around scan configurations and authentication or application logins. So we give you a number of built-in configs that you can use. So these effectively modify either the crawl behavior or the order behavior. Maybe we want to do something like minimize false positives. The choice is yours to use these as you kind of see fit, and it's good to test them and see the kind of results you get. But you do have complete control, just like you do in Pro, to create a custom config that suits your needs. If I leave it blank, it's just going to use its default settings. So I might want an authenticator crawl, so I need to add some application logins. So I've got two options here. One is a very basic username and password. So if it's a simple login form, I can just supply those credentials and the crawler will use this to authenticate against the site. Anything more complex, and I'm going to want to use my recorded login sequence. Now this is a browser plugin or extension that lets me record the process of me logging into my site and navigating to it. And that's going to generate a JSON file that you can cut and paste. And again, it's going to essentially recreate the steps from this script of us logging into the application. So anything more complex, such as SSO, it might be a multi-form login, that's going to be more beneficial from a recorded login sequence. We've done some updates to recorded login since its initial version. It's on version 2 now. So we've added some enhancements around navigation and supporting particular elements on a login form, for example, iframes. And version 3 is also being worked on, where we're specifically looking at pop-ups. Adam mentioned extensions, so this is where you would add your extension at the site level if you want to do so. Again, we can provide a list of what's available. We also have our extensibility documentation if you've got any interest in developing an extension of your own, particularly if you like one in Pro that's not necessarily available in Enterprise. You could look to create one. And then finally, we can assign it to a scanning pool if we want to, again, use a particular piece of resource or that's tied to a particular site. So that's creating a site. That's kind of the main bulk of the work out of the way. Now we want to do a scan. So if I go to new scan, very simply, I'm going to pick from my site tree, so my already created sites, the site that I want to scan against. And I've got two choices. I can run an ad hoc site, so as soon as possible, run it the once. Good for a test, but typically you're going to be scheduling your scans, so date and time, and then I can repeat this a number of days, and then that might be forever. It could be repeatable a set number of times or until a particular date. And again, we've got some more work coming in terms of additional options. So for example, something along the lines of a blackout window where you don't want scans to take place. For now, we'll just leave this at run once and as soon as possible. And this is going to pull through all of our settings that we apply to that particular site. So actually running a scan is very straightforward because we've already supplied all the required configuration settings. We'll save this. That will then assign it to an available scanning machine, assuming one is available, and it will perform our scan for us. But if we go back to a previously run scan, same site, same configuration that we've just kicked off, and this is where we can view our scan results. So from a dashboard perspective, it's particularly at a site level, we're trying to build out a picture over time of our security posture. But in terms of our individual results, we can start to delve in. All of our issues are reported by severity and confidence level. So that's high, medium, low, or informational. Then the confidence level is certain, firm, tentative, or perhaps it's a false positive that we've marked. Everything is color coded. But let's drill down into a particular issue that's been located at this location. And then we get our advisory. So we're going to get some issue detail, background information, remediation steps for the particular issue. There will typically be a reference to our Web Security Academy. So if you want to learn more about that vulnerability, that's a free resource available to you, and also a sandbox environment where you can actually carry out that payload attack. And then, of course, the classifications that are associated with that particular vulnerability. We can view the request and the response for that particular payload. And then upon further investigation, if we determine that this is actually a false positive, we can mark it as such. And there are effectively some global rules around this as how you want that false positive to propagate. So maybe it's just this one particular issue, but if we know it's going to crop up for every scan, well, maybe we want to carry that across for the whole site or the particular URL that we're looking at here. Now, if we go back to our results, we can also start generating our reports. Now, these might have been emailed at the end of the scan itself because we've had that configured, but you've always got access to the report. Summary or detailed, these are HTML-based reports. As Adam mentioned, we've just started the release of our compliance reporting. So we've got options here for OWASP Top 10 and PCI DSS. So if I select one of those, I can generate the report. And this particular one will be formatted against the OWASP Top 10 for 2021. So, folks, that's kind of scanning 101, particularly as part of the kind of trial or POC process. You're going to be wanting to run lots of tests, start getting used to scan configurations and analyzing results. We've got sites that we can provide specifically for this purpose as well, if you're not just testing against internal applications. But at that stage, once you're more comfortable with the interface and looking at results, you're probably going to want to start to build out your installation. So this is typically around integrations. So maybe you want to start doing things like issue tracking. So we've got elements around Jira, GitLab, and Trello integration. And these are for either manual or automated tickets based on our results that we get from scans. We've relatively recently released our Slack integration as well. So these are notifications in relation to scans finishing, kicking off, failing, issues, etc. Now, one element that Adam mentioned for quite a strong use case for enterprise is CICD pipeline integration. So we've got a number of drivers that are either available for a given application. So the example we'll take a look at is Jenkins, but we do have access to our generic driver as well for CICD integration. The process and results is very similar. And we'll take a look at that in a sec. But typically, as long as that pipeline is capable of running Java, you should be able to use that generic driver for any of your platforms. Okay, so bear with me 1 second here, and we'll flip across to get rid of these questions. So we'll take a look at an example of Jenkins. So we want to utilize our Burp Suite Enterprise scanner, but we want to initiate these scans from Jenkins itself. So you can download the plugin from our website. This is absolutely available and testable as part of the POC and trial as well. We add the plugin to Jenkins, and then that's going to give us some additional build step options, which are called a site-driven scan or a burp scan. So the burp scan is essentially a sort of our older method, how we originally started doing it. Site-driven scan is useful because it's going to take all of that pre-populated configuration data you've already done for your site and just kick the scan off based on that. So if we go to configure this particular project, you can see here as a build step, we've now got this option for Burp site driven scan. So if I just go to add another, you can see we've now got these two options as a result of installing the driver. It's very straightforward. So we want to connect back to our enterprise server. So it's URL and port number. We've generated an API key from an API user within Burp Suite Enterprise. This is how we're going to interact and authenticate with our enterprise installation. And then because those are now valid credentials, we populate our site tree. So all of those sites that we pre-configured, we can now initiate pipeline scans against. So we very simply select one. So we were looking at PortSwigger Labs earlier. And then we say, well, what's the severity level where we want the build to fail, and also the confidence level? And once these are found in terms of issues, Jenkins will automatically fail the build and stop it from being deployed. So again, the choices are based on our metrics that we looked at from that reporting earlier. Same with the confidence level. We can actually permit a certain number of issues if we want a threshold. We can also generate a scan report as a result of this. So from a developer's perspective, who are typically going to be doing the pipeline jobs, they actually don't even need access to the UI. They can initiate the scan from the pipeline and generate a copy of that report stored where they wish, and then analyze those results as well. Once we've saved that, we can go ahead and build, and that's going to essentially create an API generated scan against enterprise. So if we jump back in, go to scans, there's that chap there. But the driver gives us that link between Jenkins and enterprise, so we know the status of the scan at all times, so we can fail the build as and when required. So folks, that's kind of the 101 for the demo in terms of scanning. We looked at setting up our team and scanning machines, some of the integrations and pipeline scans. There is a lot more, but naturally we would just encourage you to explore that through a trial or POC. And we've got links to all of our documentation to the website as well.
Just before we move out of the demo, Alex, one of the questions that we've had is around integration with Azure DevOps. And I thought, is that probably a good time to discuss some of the changes we might make to CICD integration?
Yeah, so again, for the time being, in terms of like specific drivers, that is Jenkins and TeamCity. Then we've got the generic driver, which customers are using today in relation to Azure DevOps. Now, we're actually looking to move away from kind of the driver concept, and we're actually looking at utilizing containerization in the pipeline instead, because that will be completely agnostic to what pipeline you actually use internally. It could be something that's homebrewed. It could be any number of the given platforms out there. So essentially, we're just running a containerized version of the scanner within the pipeline. So we don't necessarily need that integration as such. Hence, we don't need to develop and maintain lots of different drivers. So I'd keep your eye out for that as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, I'll pass you back to Adam now.
Brilliant, thanks. Would you mind skipping on to the next page? Thank you very much. There we go. So we obviously mentioned right at the top that we were going to give you a bit of a sneak peek at some of the changes that we've got coming in our roadmap. So our roadmap as a whole is publicly available direct from our site. We will, the URL's at the top, but we'll put a link in the YouTube description or within the video as well. Taking a snip here to obviously see what it looks like. We're obviously covering what is a feature enhancement, a new feature, and we really try and stick to our public commitment when it comes to roadmap. I know it's cliche to say that it's a roadmap item, but we really do try and stick to it. However, as I said, we did promise you a sneak peek, and I'm going to very quickly hand back over to Alex, who we're going to look through some quite major UI changes and scanner config changes that are due in the next couple of months that we're really excited about.
Yeah, so we're currently working on a few different items, but we've kind of picked a couple that I think seem appropriate because we've had a lot of customer experience feedback. And it's something we've really been interested in recently. So that's manifested itself in sort of two streams. And one is especially around sort of trial and POC users is understanding the scan configurations and being able to get started quite quickly with knowing kind of which scan profile to pick. How do I create a custom profile, for example? So one change that is coming is this notion of a preset scan mode versus that custom configuration scan mode that will still always be there for complete control. But this preset scan mode is designed just to be as easy to understand and straightforward to use as possible. It's giving you a few of our sort of common profiles And you can see some on the screen now. So a lightweight scan that's going to give you fast feedback on a site security when speed is a priority, perhaps over thoroughness. And again, particularly a good one if you're testing sites as part of a POC and a trial, and you're just looking to start to get to grips with the results as quickly as possible. So that's currently being worked on. Next, we've got our feedback timeline, so to speak. So it's all well and good kind of kicking off the scans and looking at results. One component of feedback we've had is that sort of bit in the middle, and sort of assessing scans as they're running and kind of knowing at what stage the scan is at. Is the scan going to complete successfully, or am I hitting lots of errors for whatever reason? So we're working on this timeline concept where visually you're going to get a lot of feedback in terms of where the scan is up to and what it's doing. So you can see here we've got our status of queued. We've just kicked off the scan. It's waiting to be assigned to a scanning machine. Next, we would get the notification that we know the scanner has started. And then we're in the crawl phase. And we're going to get information around what it's doing during the crawl, how many requests are being made, locations, what current URL is it looking at. Next will be the audit phase. So we start to get a sense of what issues are being found. Are we hitting any errors? Are we skipping any checks for whatever reason? And there's going to be detailed information around each of those notifications so that you can make an informed decision. And then, of course, when the scan is finished, you can start to analyze those results. So those are some pretty big UI-based and customer experience changes that are coming.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone that submitted their questions. I know the team are working through quite a lot of those at the moment. I'm just going to have a quick scan and pull some of those out. I don't want to take up all of your time to go through those one by one, but as I promised, what we'll do is we'll group all of those together, include any links that are relevant, and we'll share it with the attendee list after the call. So there are a couple here that have caught my eye. So let me go through them now. So one of them was, do we only support the top 10 OWASP vulnerabilities? And James has replied there. So that's specifically just one of our compliance report templates. So it's not related to vulnerability checks. There are a considerable amount more of vulnerability checks that we have there. We've got one probably best for you, Alex. Can we group a list of URLs together, especially for scheduling a scan?
So can we group lists of URLs together for scheduling scan? So as we looked at when we were configuring our site, we can include additional URLs, but that would typically be part of the same site. If we're looking to run scans against multiple URLs that we want to schedule, that's going to be part of our bulk actions update that's coming down the line. Fantastic.
We've also got how do you manage if there is a capture form within the login, within the authentication? So Sophie's given a full answer there, but at present we're obviously not able to support capture. This may be something that we look at in the future. Are you able to give any more?
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially anything that requires manual intervention in an automated scanner is always going to be a kind of Achilles heel, so to speak. It's difficult to provide a mechanism whereby, you need that sort of manual input, be it a unique one-time passcode, be it completing a capture form, particularly because the kind of main use case for enterprise is that it is automated. It's scanning probably constantly, out of hours, very much off hands. You might not be monitoring scans. It's always something we're looking at if there are mechanisms we can provide. So, for example, in relation to capture, we will, of course, go down that development route. But for the moment, at least, any kind of manual intervention we would typically advise you to disable those as part of your scan testing, or create a specific user that doesn't have those mechanisms applied to that user. Brilliant.
Thank you. There was another one that grabbed my eye before. We've had quite a few questions in with regards to the Kubernetes deployment. So we've got some really good documentation on that. So I think probably best, rather than going into specifics there, we'll send the documentation out. And if there are any further questions, then the team are more than happy to follow up on over email if there's no clarity there. And also around does the tool cover any healthcare compliance as per US law to maintain patient healthcare data? So yeah, as Sophie's very eloquently answered, so we've We don't have any specific healthcare compliance or any frameworks that we work to, but obviously we are not hosting your data. This is not a SaaS product, so it's installed in your own environment, and we don't transact with any of that data at all. So that's another difference between ourselves and some of the other SaaS platforms that are obviously interacting with the data that is being scanned. I can't see any other questions that have popped up. There's a couple around API scanning. Possibly worth, I'm trying to have a quick scan of that one if that would be appropriate to answer.
So yeah, you're correct at the moment in regards to API scanning. It's Open API spec that we currently support. It is worth mentioning that the sort of latter half of this year, there's going to be a lot of development time dedicated to enhancing API scanning, because it's certainly an area we had a lot of feedback and requests to. So you should expect a sort of larger breadth in terms of what's capable with API scanning. So to give you an example, being able to upload a definition as part of the scan as opposed to having to host it as part of the URL is something we're looking at. Supporting things like Swagger or Postman collections, that sort of notion. It's all kind of work in progress at the moment, so we can't be too definitive, but definitely check in towards the end of this year.
Great stuff. Right, well, we've ran slightly over today, so thank you very much, everyone, for attending. In terms of what happens next, as we've said, we're going to send the question and answer responses out via email. We'll group those together with all of the links. The recording of today's session will be added to YouTube, and again, we'll either embed or put the links in the description to any documentation mentioned. If you've previously evaluated Burp Suite Enterprise Edition and you'd like another trial, then please respond to the email that we send out. We'd love to see how you get on and support you through that POC or evaluation. Obviously, you can see that lots changed, so we'd love to see how that works within your organisation. And if you're an existing customer that's got any questions or would like to increase their scan schedule or look to add more concurrent scans, again, you can do that via your own account portal, but we'd be more than happy to support you through that process. So just reach out. My email should be in the actual Zoom link itself, but it will be we'll be following up in the next sort of 24 hours or so with all the information mentioned. So thank you very much, Alex, and thank you very much for joining today's session. We look forward to seeing you again soon. And just a quick reminder that on the 22nd, we'll be running the session again. So any colleagues that weren't able to attend today, then we can send out and extend an invite. We'd love to see them there. Thanks very much.
Thanks all.